Course 3. These are the review questions that we are using for our quiz on Friday. So some of these might have actually looked pretty familiar. The first few actually were on the review for our last quiz. So if you would like to see the answers and how to do them for these first 5, go ahead and go back to the video that I had before for last quiz that we had, just to kind of briefly, very briefly go over these. If I were to look at number 1 here, what is the sale price of a video game if the original price is $58 and there is a 30% discount? Well, what I would do here is say 58 times what I have left. Well, if there's a 30% discount, that means that I have to pay for 70%, which as a decimal is 0.7. And I could find my answer pretty quickly doing it that way. Other ways to do it, of course, too. Second one, last year a shed in Sally's backyard had a perimeter of 30 feet and an area of 50 feet squared. This year she needs more space and wants a perimeter of 90 feet. What's the area of the new shed? Little hint here, you can always go back to the other video to see the full thing, but we're using perimeter scale factors and area scale factors. Perimeter scale factor from 30 to 90 is times 3. So if I use my area scale factor, then I'm using 9 to go from 50 times 9 to my new area. Okay? And then number 3 here, if a plane trip takes 2.5 hours to go 500 miles, how long will a trip take if we need to go 950 miles? I would set up a proportion to say 2.5 hours takes me for 500 miles. So how many hours? X hours for 950 miles. And you can use a cross multiplication in order to do that. All right, if the diameter of a cone is 8 inches and the height is 10 inches, what is the slant height of the cone? Well, slant height, we take a cone and we say, all right, the diameter of this is 8, the height is 10, and we use a cross section of it. So we're basically cutting it like this, which gives me a triangle with a height of 10 and a base of 8. Well, in order to find the slant height, which is down this side, I'm going to use half of this triangle, which is a right triangle, with the dimensions of 10, 4, half of the base, and something. You can use the Pythagorean theorem to solve this. All right, now if we have a cone that has a diameter of 10, here's my cone, diameter of 10 and a height of 9 inches. What's the volume? Well, we're going to do area of the base times the height, but since it's a cone, I'm only going to take 1/3 of it. So we're going to use 1/3 of pi r squared, area of the base, since it's a circle, and times the height. And you can go ahead and plug those in to find the volume. All right, so now to some new questions here. What is the lateral surface area of the right pyramid with a square base? So if I do this, I don't actually want to include the area of the base for this. What I do want to know is the lateral surface area, which is these 4 triangles. So to do that, there's lots of ways to do it. How I would go about it right now would be saying, all right, well, I know that each one of those triangles is the same, and I have 4 of them. Well, we already know we're given that the slant height is 12 and the base is 7. So I would do, typically, for my lateral surface area, area of that triangle is base times height divided by 2, and I have 4 of them, so I'm going to multiply that by 4. I'll reduce here, and then I would say 12 times 7 times 2 would give me, 168 units squared. Okay, so we're just finding the area of those 4 triangles. Okay, a rule for a sequence is a sub n equals 4 times n minus 1. Find the first 4 terms of the sequence. Well, all this is wanting me to do is say, well, what is a sub 1 and a sub 2 and 3 and 4? And we plug in n as each of those numbers. So 4 times 1 minus 1, which 4 times 0 is just 0. Plug in 2, we get 4 times 2 minus 1, which is 4. and then 4 times 3 minus 1, which is 8. And then, of course, we get my last term when you plug in 4 as 12. So 0, 4, 8, 12 is my sequence. All right, what's the area of the triangle? Well, I need to multiply some radicals. 3 root 3 times root 3. Well, if I have square root of 3 times square root of 3, I can multiply those since they're both radicals, and I get 3 times the square root of 9. I can simplify that square root of 9 to just be 3. So 3 times 3 is 9 units squared. Okay. Continuing on, graph -5 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 7 on a number line. Well, lots of ways to do this. You could take and piece this apart to say we have one part here, -5 is less than x, and the other part, x is less than or equal to 7. And then you can flip this around to be x is greater than -5, so it's easier to graph. Regardless, when you do this, you're going to get from -5 to 7 with an open dot on -5, closed dot on 7, and they're going to connect in the middle since this is a compound inequality, a joint situation here, an and situation. All right, what two numbers are the solutions to the equation? Well, I need to get x by itself. So in this case, I'm going to add 63 to each side and get 2x squared is equal to 90. Let's see, yep, 90. And then I divide by 2. And I get x squared is equal to 45, and then I take the square root of each side. Now, it may be tempting to just leave your answer as the square root of 5, but the square root of 45, but two different things to remember. Number one, when we have a quadratic equation, so something with that power of 2, I have two different solutions, plus or minus the square root of 45. And that square root of 45 is not simplified. So I would simplify it by saying that's 9 times 5. And the square root of 9 is 3. So I have 3 root 5. And I have plus or minus of that. And so that is my solution. Make sure you have both solutions and that you have simplified your radical. All right, expand. I'm just going to show basically FOIL, but in rainbows and smiley faces. So I'll do my first rainbow from the first one to the first one in the next one. X times x is x squared. Second rainbow, x times 6 is 6x. -3 times x is -3x. -3 times 6 is -18. There are some of these that are like terms. Those two are like terms, so I can combine them to be x squared plus 3x minus 18, and that is my expanded version. All right, which of the relationships below is proportional? Number of workers and the time needed for a project. Well, with that one, if I have more people doing the same project, it's going to take less time. So as I increase my workers, I'm going to decrease time. That's not proportional. Let's see, the radius of the area of a circle. Well, if I think about area with radius, my formula is pi r squared. R squared is not going to give me a straight line. It's going to give me a curve. So that one's not going to be proportional either, since I'm looking for a line through the origin. C says time to work and money earned. Well, if I get, let's say, $5 for every hour that I work in the yard, for every hour worked, that would mean I would get a total that would be linear and would go through the origin. So C is actually proportional here. Okay, so let's solve some of these equations. So first of all, I see this 1/3 that I need to get rid of, since with PEMDAS backwards, I need to get rid of any addition or subtraction, and I've added this 1/3, so I'm going to subtract it from each side. But I don't see common denominator, so I'm going to change this to 4/9 minus 3/9, and I get that I have 3/4 x is equal to 1/9. And then I've multiplied by 3/4, so I'm going to divide by it. But dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. And I get x is equal to 4/27. All right, next one, solve for x. I'm going to expand first and get 3x plus 15 equals x minus 7. Then I need my variables on the same side. Here I have 3x and here I have 1x. I'm going to get rid of that 1x from this side by subtracting x. so that I have 2x plus 15 equals negative 7. And now it's just a two-step equation by subtracting 15. 2x is equal to negative 22. Divide by 2 and I get x equals negative 11. All right, now we're going to simplify, and we have some negative exponents to deal with, but also some variables that are similar in numerator and denominator. So I'm going to actually combine those variables first. And in the numerator, I have 5x to the third, since I have x squared and x up there, and then y to the negative third, over 15y squared, and then that x to the 0 and x to the negative fourth is just going to be x to the negative fourth, since I add those exponents when multiplying. Now I'm going to deal with the negative exponents. I'm going to put this x to the negative fourth over the fraction, and then y to the negative third down over the fraction as well. They're going to swap places. Now I have 5x to the third, x to the fourth, since when I flip it over it becomes a positive exponent, over 15y squared, and then y to the positive third. Now I'm just going to combine and simplify. The 5 and 15 can simplify, so I have 1 over 3. I have x to the 7th and y to the 5th. So that should be my final answer, since I have no more variables to simplify, no negative exponents, and all of my numbers have been simplified too. Okay, 66 2/3% of a fourth of 0.6. I'm going to change all of these, let's say, to fractions. 66 2/3%, that's a common one. That's just 2/3 as a fraction. 1/4 is already a fraction, and since I have of here, I know I'm multiplying. And then 6/10, well, I just said it's fractions. 6/10 reduces to 3/5. And now I can multiply all of these fractions. But I'm going to simplify some things first. I see a 3 and a 3 across from each other, a 2 and a 4, and so I see that my answer is 1 over 10. So a tenth, or you could put it as a decimal 0.1, depending on how you went about it, but either of those would be just fine. And then to finish these off, just these last two. So to simplify, I'm going to do PEMDAS, so I'm going to multiply first, and so I get negative 10 plus a negative 6, and then I'm going to go ahead and simplify. Minus a negative 7 is really adding 7, divided by negative 1. And so I'll add those on the top. Negative 10 plus negative 6, those combine to be a negative 16, plus 7 is a negative 9. It's like losing 16 points, then gaining 7, divided by a negative 1. Well, negative divided by a negative is a positive, and I just get positive 9. Last one here. Let's multiply on the bottom first, and 0.3 times 0.03, I get 9 and 0, but I have to move the decimal 3 times, so I add that 0, so I get 0.009 on the denominator. And on the numerator, I am taking 0.5 minus 0.05. So add that 0, and we end up getting 0.45. And then I need to divide 0.45, and I would actually do this out to make sure your decimals are in the right place, divided by 0.009. Got to move it 3 times on the outside, so I move it 3 times on the inside. 9 goes into 45 5 times, but I'm not quite done yet because I still have a 0 to come down, so I add a 0, and my final answer is 50. All right, well, I hope that helps with your understanding for some of these review questions to make sure that you're ready for Friday's quiz.